When you think of church, what comes to mind? A place for people to further their faith? A place to meet and fellowship with like-minded believers? A place of worship? Nearly 45% of Londoners are Christians, and within that demographic, each person's experience with church is different. Though we may attend with the same intentions, there are some things along the journey that we can't always preempt.
Why does anyone want to talk about anything that's negative? I think if you even look at businesses, they only shine a light on the things that are positive. You don't shine a light on the things that are negative. And church is supposed to be, well, in the eyes of, I guess, society, it's supposed to be a place that is happy, a place where people go to get help. It's a place of refuge. So to talk about the wrongdoings that happen in church, it's not something that people want to discuss because you don't want it to look bad to those that you're trying to bring in. People don't want to share what they've gone through in regards to church hurt because there's an element of shame. When you've experienced something to do with the church, it's like, I shouldn't have experienced anything to do with the church because the church is supposed to be somewhere I go to for help, where I go to be safe, where I go to strengthen my spiritual life. So then when you've gone through church hurt, it's like, how can I share this with anyone? That's not what I was supposed to have experienced. And especially if in joining a particular church, you found it to be this amazing place, you found it to be a place that felt like home, for you to then have gone through something that has hurt you and it's from the church, it's like, I can't share that with anyone. I think those who are prideful would have an issue with talking about church hurt. Also those who are guilty, feeling guilty, whether they've seen church hurt and they haven't necessarily done anything about it to minimize it or stop it from happening, or even those who feel as though they were responsible for someone experiencing church hurt. Those kind of people, they're going to feel guilty, and because of that they won't want to open up about people's experiences of church hurt, especially if they haven't made peace with the things that they've done towards those people. I had a discussion with my friend about church in general, not specific to church hurt, and she was someone who got pregnant really young and obviously before marriage. And for her, her experience was, she didn't directly experience church hurt, but the idea of experiencing church hurt caused her to not go to church after she found out that she was pregnant. She actually left church because of the idea of being judged. And then as a result of that experience in church hurt, and her whole family left the church because of it. Her dad was someone that was had quite a big role in the church as well. And the whole family left the church just because they knew that going to church would just cause them to experience a lot of judgment for what she had done. And to avoid that, they left their church. I think she felt as though she couldn't go back, or why she had that kind of anxiety for, if I go, I'm going to get judged. It probably goes back to the old school church and how there was a specific standard. You were supposed to dress a certain way, you weren't allowed to come in a certain way. There were certain things you knew you weren't allowed to do because that's what a sinner does. And that's probably leaked into today's society still, even though it might not be as, it might not be said as forcefully, it's still there in society. So you feel as though there's certain things you're not allowed to do if you're a Christian, or there's certain things that you can't talk about because you're a Christian. And I think that probably caused not only her but people in general to feel some kind of anxiety about opening up about the things that you've gone through, or going back to a church once you've become pregnant outside of marriage. Yeah, I think it's a shame, but it's definitely something that goes from way back. People don't want to share their experiences of church hurt because of the fear of being judged. Unfortunately, anyone that does anything wrong, everybody has a tendency to judge them. But to get it on a wide scale in the church probably is worse, because you're made to feel as though you're not part of the family that church is supposed to be. Naturally, you feel like an outsider as soon as you've been judged. And yeah, that's off-putting. So then you're not going to want to share the experiences of what you've gone through if you know that it's just going to ultimately cause you to feel as though you're outside. The church is supposed to be a safe space. It's supposed to be somewhere that you go to and you find a family. It's supposed to be somewhere comfortable. It's supposed to be somewhere where you don't feel like you're going to be judged. You don't feel like you're going to be turned away. It's a place where people receive healing, are supposed to receive healing from all of their different life experiences. And it's supposed to be ultimately the place where you all have the same vision, which is to continue to strengthen your relationship with God and to reach out to other people. Ultimately it's just supposed to be a place where you fellowship with others that have the same goal, and that place should be somewhere that you are happy. When church is good, it feels like home, and home should be a place where you feel safe. And that family feeling not only allows you to feel safe, but it allows you to feel happy. And that's the feeling that most people get from church when it's good.
When you walk into a church, you walk into a family. So you feel comfortable, protected. You can share things maybe you wouldn't even share outside maybe of your family, because we see each other so often. So when you're hurt by the people that you've given yourself transparently to, it's something hard. It's a blow. You're saying this family. And it just lingers, because at the end of the day, you kind of feel bare, naked, because you've opened up so much. And I think that's the reason why it hurts so much, because you've given so much of yourself to a family that you believed, you were in a safe place.
To me, church hurt is a product of someone having a degrading, demeaning, upsetting experience with a member of or the church itself. And this particular experience is so painful that the person or the group of people have been scarred and are looking for ways to heal because of that experience.
I got saved back in 1980, late July, August, through a young man. I was going through depression, and a young man, while I was walking the streets, having thoughts of committing suicide, I started to shout like a madman on the street, shouting out, looking towards the sky, because obviously I'm shouting to God and telling him why he's not helping me. And as I started to shout at God, looking at the sky, I heard the voice 3 times. And some people say, well, God don't talk to people, but I know God talks to people. And I heard a voice 3 times telling me how much he loves me. And I screamed out, shouted from the top of my voice, well, if you love me, help me. And when I did this, the young man came over to me and began to tell me about Jesus and how much Jesus loved me. Anyway, I started to visit the church that this young man was in after I gave my heart to Jesus. It took him 3 hours trying to convert me, trying to get me to believe and accept Jesus. In the end, I did. And I started going to the church, and there was only a few members in that church at the time. And I started to work along with the church leader, the same young man who actually was the pastor of the church. And we started working together very closely. As the church grew in numbers through evangelism and street preaching and so on, I was promoted as a deacon in the church. I was doing very well. I was so happy, and having my son born at the time, my first son. And then later, my second son was born the following year. Things were looking brilliant for me. Anyway, as the church grew in numbers, obviously you get different people coming into the church. There was a lot of jealousy, envy, because I was very close to the pastor, because we were very close, and people were lying on me to the pastor. They were saying things like I was trying to take over his church. But because he saw how God was using me, the church leader, the pastor, saw how God was using me and how the young men was flocking around me. So, the pastor got a bit funny over it. He started to, distance me. There was rejection. I was no longer fit for my position. He made another person the deacon. He also promoted another young man to be the pastor of the church, the assistant pastor. So I was bypassed and I was rejected, and I felt so much pain and hurt. In the midst of all that, God was bringing people to my life that was encouraging me and strengthening me to stand, and I continued to stand and still be serving in the church. We would travel on mission trips to various parts of the world that I would be ministering. And the church leader, the pastor, will notice how many people would get saved. And he had preached the whole week, and maybe 10 or maybe 15 got saved. But I preached one night, and 60 people got saved, and he couldn't understand that. So there was a lot of jealousy and envy. Eventually, as God started to use me prophetically, I began to speak and prophesy in the church things that God wanted the people to hear. He didn't like it. Many of the church leaders didn't like it. That was part of the church board, didn't like it. They were very close to him. And I felt isolated. I felt rejected, as I said earlier. I felt, the pain that, look, I've been in this ministry for so many years, worked with the pastor, see the church grow in numbers. And here I'm just being rejected and treated like, like I was the devil himself, And there was a particular instance when I prophesied, where God had me to prophesy and say to the church particular words, which I will say, because this is what God said to me. God said to tell the people to worship me, for I am God, and they should not worship a man. And that was the word that God gave me to speak, and I spoke it. And I remember there was one instance where the ushers actually grabbed me and pushed me at the front door, because the pastor told him to do so if I opened my mouth. Anyway, I decided I'll still go back to church, because that's the only place I knew. I was there for nearly 12 years of my Christian life, and that's the only place I knew. So I went back, and when I approached the door that Sunday morning, I was told not to come back into this building. And you know what, the pain, the pain that I felt being in the place for 12 years, and you're told you're no longer welcome here, and this is the house of God. This is a building where people come worship God, and this is the people that I knew. I felt I was a member of a family, of the greatest family on earth, and I've been told I'm no longer accepted. So much pain. I went to my car and I started crying. I cried. One day I was just at home, just sitting and just thinking about all that had happened and what the things I did at church for the Lord, driving the school bus, driving the church van, taking them to the meetings, going to the choir practices, driving them to Leeds and Birmingham, serving as a deacon in the church, attending the prayer meetings, leading the prayer meetings, and all the things that I have been doing. I did it for God. I did it all from my heart, and then to be rejected and to be pushed out like that, it was very painful. And I felt the pain deep within me. 4 or 5 months gone by, I went and I made an appointment to see the pastor. And I said to him, when I did see him, I said, Pastor, I've come to tell you that I'm sorry for the things I've said, because I did say a lot of things about him, because when you're hurt, you say things about people, you do say things that you're trying to, get back at a person for hurting you. And I said things about him, and I told him, I said things about you that I shouldn't have said, and I'm here to say I'm sorry. And this is, and I have to say this as well, and this is the response that I got. The things that I did, the things I said, that this is what he's saying to me. The things that he said and the things that he did, the Holy Spirit of God had him to do it. And I froze for a moment, and I thought, the pain, the hurt, the rejection, the Spirit of God had you to do that. And not a word of forgiveness or sorry came out of his mouth. And I left there feeling, you know what, was it worth me coming to see this man? But in my heart, I had done what was right. I went and I said, I'm sorry for the things I said about you. Then I left. You know what? Years went by and I carried on serving the Lord in other churches, other ministries. The Lord used me prophetically, and I was rejected again. I was kicked out of churches, and I'm not going to name, and some of them are actually big, well-established churches that I actually visited, and the Lord had me to prophesy and speak his word, and they rejected me.
I wanted my identity hidden because I'm quite a high-profile figure in our church. My family is very predominant in our church, and all of this history I've not really shared with anybody. I've just kind of kept it to myself, and I share pieces but not the whole story, so no one knows my whole story completely. I always say to people, you do not know me. You know what I show you, but you do not know me. And I've also got to protect my children as well. By protecting my identity, I also protect my church. Isn't that strange? The whole story started when I got married. Everything seemed to be really perfect. I met the man of my dreams, I had the wedding of my dreams, everything was fine. Except at my previous church, the first church we were in didn't like the fact that we didn't get them overly involved, and they alienated us quite extensively. I was hurt, but I thought, I can deal with it, and I moved to the next place with him to start a family and to start our journey together. And everything was fine until you begin to take them as your church family, and everything seemed to be okay. We had our first child, and throughout my pregnancy, things were touch and go, as my ex-husband had been to prison, and that was very hard. Very few people knew, and when they did find out, it was frowned upon. It wasn't a good thing that he went to prison, but I thought it would have been used in a more positive light. After that, I found out that my ex-husband was having an affair with somebody very high-ranking in church whilst I was 8 months pregnant. That was hard to deal with, but I think what hurt me the most was when it came out, I was looked at as the bad person, and everything about our life became church conversation. What our relationship was like, how often we had sex, how often he was at home, how often I was at home, how often I was at my mum's, and so our lives became very public. Soon after my first child, I felt very alienated. My ex-husband didn't live with us anymore, but was still coming to church. And I felt like, especially through that season, being a new mother, having a child, there's so many things going on, and I felt like there was no support. I picked myself up and went on. I tried really desperately because the way I had been raised was mother and father always stay together. That's what I had seen, so I tried to keep my relationship with my ex-husband. Oh, I forgot to say, throughout my first pregnancy, there were rumours that the child wasn't my ex-husband's, which was quite hurtful, as they weren't coming from outside, they were coming from within the church, and I was still going to church. And I felt very alienated and just not part of the community anymore, but I was still going as I knew that I had a relationship with God, and that's what was important to me. Fast forward, I had my second child, went through a divorce, which is so not church-like. So for a long time I was labelled. I couldn't be promoted in church because I was divorced. I was a single mother, I was this, I was that. I just couldn't take a lot of the talking about me, so I stopped church for a while. I stayed at home, I travelled, and then I went back to God, and He told me to go back to church, the same church. That was hard. Because of who was involved, the church felt they had to be behind that person more than me, and so it became the church against me and my family. It wasn't just mine and my ex-husband's issue anymore. It had become the whole church's issue, and everybody knew about it. It was so ridiculous. I thought the church family was supposed to support you. It was a big lesson for me. I felt a lot of self-shame and even feeling inadequate to wanting to be in church. And going through the things I went through in church, I felt that I wasn't able to get my life back quick enough. It was a terrible time in my life. I would never want anyone to go through that. Never. To me, people who go through bad things who don't go to church are able to bounce back and get their lives together a lot quicker. I probably would have lost my mind if I didn't have my family support. It was actually quite traumatic, emotionally, physically, mentally, and people are not aware of this. So what happens is we're in an environment where they think that because they're spiritual beings, they can solve every problem, but they can't. There wasn't anyone trained or qualified to handle the psychological issues that I was going through, the emotional issues that I was going through, the mental issues that I was going through, and it was all just looked down upon. And I had people telling me, encourage yourself in the Lord. And honestly, when you're going through things like that, that is the last thing you want to hear. You want to look at practical tools to be able to deal with the feelings that you're going through. And what they fail to realize is every feeling is valid. I feel depressed even though I'm a Christian. I feel sad even though I'm a Christian. When you look at David, he went through bouts of depression. You look at Elijah, he went through bouts of depression. He was severely depressed, but we don't talk about those things. The Bible has everything in there, but we take out all of these things which are part of life, and we just talk about the miracles and the most spectacular things God does. But how about the fact that somebody was depressed but was still able to command so much of God's power? There was a picture painted of God that he is just a magician who can make things disappear. It does not work like that. I could have allowed it to destroy me, but if it destroyed me, who would be there for my children? That's the way I look at things.
If I ever heard that any member of my family was involved in a form of church hurt, I'll be extremely sad. I'll be heartbroken.
A lot more people believe that parents share this hurt with their children, whereas coming from my experience, my parents always tried to shield myself and my brother from church hurt, but not in a way of ignorance, but church people also need to recognise that we understand and see what's going on even when we're trying to be protected. When you witness a level of disrespect towards your parents, when you can personally see how much investment they put into the church, it can make you want to withdraw from the same institution if you're not careful. I think it's easy to forget that sometimes leaders are human and they will have their downfalls, they will get things wrong, and I think often a lot of judgment can take place that can kind of not destroy the reputation of the individuals, but alter the reputation that they do hold because of that. And I think viewing a lack of love towards your parents from the church, it kind of alters your whole perception of what the church is meant to be, and can make you question whether the church is who they say they are doing what they are supposed to be doing. Especially if it's someone in leadership, you assume that they'll be held with respect, held in a high regard, held with love, and you would often feel that they'll be understood or they would have more grace given to them if they do fall, or if miscommunications take place, if situations are involved. And I think often if your parents do not receive a certain level of love, you can start to question the integrity of the people in the church, because often you do witness your parents maybe leaving home to visit someone from church, spending long hours in church offices, spending a lot of time invested in the church. Those are your parents that you're seeing in the firing line, and so you just want to have their back in that sense. So although it may not be good, you go into defense mode, trying to protect them, and I think that's on face value, but I think times where I've experienced it, when I'd be by myself, it would be just emotions, as in physical tears, because of just a lack of understanding why, how, and because people don't see the effect that it can have on your parents. When you see it for first-hand value, when you see sometimes a lack of joy lack of peace, even stress, even tears. I think it has the same effect on you, and depending on how you handle it, it can just drive you further and further away from the church. Because I think in anything that can harm your parents or your family, you don't really want to have anything to do with it, or you want to remove them from the situation. And that's not always the case with leaders, because they have responsibility. They can't run away from their calling. They can't run away from the responsibility they hold within the church. So in that sense, you can only protect them from the sideline, and often, no matter what you say, they're still going to go back to the same place that could have hurt them because of their integrity and their love for the people. If I was to speak to another PK or pastor's child who's witnessing church hurt within their family, I would tell them to speak to someone and be open to their parents about it, and let the parents know that I can see the effect it's having on you, and relate to them the effect it's having on them personally, because it will always have an effect. And so I would say speak to your parents or speak to someone you can confide in about the situation, because often it can become like a burden. You feel like you're holding the responsibility, or you're holding the weight that your parents are experiencing, which I don't think children should have to go through, to be honest. And I don't think that should be inflicted on children anyway, coming from an institution that's supposed to be the safe place for you.
It's very difficult to actually ascertain what that pain is like, because different people experience pain in different ways. But what I would say is church hurt in question is among the most excruciating pain on earth. The pain that I've experienced is abuse, verbal, and in general, doing things to nag you and to upset you in church. And most of these experiences are in the charlatantic churches. You want me to explain? A church run by a man or woman who feels that he or she should be everything, more so at the expense of others. And they will do all that lies in their power to undermine or to belittle or to make that person with potential, who shines, who do what they do very well, look a certain way or feel a certain way. The church is supposed to be a haven, a place of rescue, place of refuge, right? Sinners, not just sinners, but people in general, non-Christians, will come to the church for guidance, for care and for love. And if you come to the church and experience the opposite, that's it. So in that regard, if people leave the world that is supposed to dish out anger and arrogance and hate, and come to the church that's supposed to be dishing out love, so to speak, and is dishing out exactly the same or worse, it might be seen as the worst sort of pain that people experience. Because I grew up with a reverend in Jamaica, and I think Pastor Esmond Phillips was an excellent pastor. She led from the front, nurtured and cared from the middle, and guided from the back. Yeah, those days were good days, had a very good grounding as a young boy, and I grew up under genuine leadership. And I always reflect on that. And I compare then with now, and I say to myself, there is good leaders around, but just that they're in the minority. Yeah, so what helps me most of the time to get over hurt is my past good experiences in Jamaica under good leadership. People within the church or within the ministries who are friendly with the pastor who dishes out the hurt, who are afraid they may get ridiculed. From past experience, I saw officers in the church who knew I was damaged. It was just damage beyond human imagination, would never ever come and administer a word of encouragement or come and give a prayer or come and spend some time to restore me, so to speak, because they were afraid to get into trouble with the leader. And I don't think that's right. So a lot of people who decide not to engage with people who are hurting, they do it on the basis that they feel that the leader is going to come down hard on them. The truth is, many pastors, when you are hurt severely and you want to tell your story, they find a way to present you to the world as something completely opposite of what you are. Yeah? And defamation of character happens within the body of Christ too, sorry to say. When hurt happens, you've got to blame yourself, because a lot of the things we experience, we've played a part in it. Either that we were disobedient, or we were not discerning, or we expected too much from people. Better way to put it, take responsibility. Yes, yes, take responsibility. I think sometimes inflictor gives the blow so forcefully that it makes you forget that you in question have a part to play in the whole process. Church hurt can make you suicidal. Yeah. And put you in depression, make you don't want to feed on the Word of God, make you don't want to form relationships, make you don't want to trust people. The lists are endless, absolutely endless. I saw pure, unadulterated damage from an institution that's supposed to be called the body of Christ. And I just felt devalued. Yeah, just deflated and felt like I'm no good. It made me didn't want to believe in myself, didn't want to sing as I used to, didn't want to preach as I used to, didn't want to share as I used to. So it's church hurt can just make the person be somebody totally different from what they were originally. That's how disgusting that hurt can be. Change you from the nicest person on earth to the greatest monster to ever come in contact with. Yeah, it's true. When someone experiences verbal abuse or physical abuse within the body of Christ, it do happen. We have to find a way to deal with that problem and to get that person or persons back into form and get them being active and contributing to making change in the kingdom. That's what I think.
We as the church hasn't learned how to deal with hurt and pain. It's only until we have a situation that it comes to the forefront. And that's why I had a sermon that I preached was confront, release, and move on. I think those are the mechanisms that we're going to need if we stumble into a position where we have a church hurt. We need to confront the situation, then release that situation, and then feel free to move forward again. But unless those mechanisms are in place, I think we will always carry that baggage of church hurts. Even if it's to another church or to another workplace or another situation, we will always carry it because we haven't dealt with it. Some of us are not trained in HR, and I think every pastor, every leader should be trained in HR because you're dealing with people every time. that they can feel happy and free to come to you and say, look, this is what I'm feeling and this is who I've been offended by, and feel comfortable that there is a mechanism in the church that can facilitate dealing with that situation, before it begins to ooze outside of the fellowship or even ooze to other members. It's for the church and its leadership to sit back and say, let's put on a program dealing with HR, how to protect our members, how to listen to them, how to see the signs. If there is something bugging that individual, if they're not operating the way that we're so used to seeing them, is there something wrong? And then make a beeline towards them. I think that's the only thing we can do to really improve and to cut down church hurt. If we could compromise a little bit and empathize, and that's the word. We've shown enough sympathy over the years, but I think we need to show a bit of empathy and feel, why is that person feeling that way? It will allow us in leadership to listen and take away information that we could say, you know what, let's look out for the future, that nothing like this happens again. So let's take away the sympathy and let the church, the black church, be more empathetic towards people who have been let down and who feels, that they've been hurt. We may need to bring in resources outside to teach us how to spot the telltale signs. So that's one of the things the church never seems to have budgets for, which is training. And I think if we're dealing with people, there should be a budget in place once a year, twice a year, if according to the size of the budget of the ministry, that they can go out and be trained in how to deal with people's management, deal with people's emotions, because we're managing people, like it or not. When we gather together, we are managing them, promoting them, empowering them. It's part of management. And I think something should be put in place that the leadership could go on a course to learn how to manage its staff, how to manage its people, and how to address certain issues. It's training. It's some type of training that we need, and not just to take it for granted that because we're in leadership, we know it all. In a church, every member has a value, and it's that value you pull on for the ministry to move to the next level. So if that individual is hurting and is not given the value that's placed in them, it will worry, it will trickle down, it will affect departments, it will affect the church. People will notice, hey, that person's not the same like they used to be. And that will take an inquiry. And when they get to hear, then at the end of the day, that spreads and contaminates. And so you do feel bad, because now if you're running on 5 cylinders, you're only running on 4 because that person's affected. So for me, it's not good when someone you look to who has a ministry is affected and is hurt, because you know, therefore, their general well-being and also the gifting and the ability that they have will not be at the same level of performance. So you've got to get in there. You just got to get in there, because if you don't, you never know what can happen. So for a leader's point of view, we have to rescue the perishing and care for the dying. They have. And people have told me, yes, Bishop, because of you did that, that's how I felt. And I can tell you this, it's not something that I was totally aware of, but I have to stand back and look and examine that. And what I always say is, you put your hands up syndrome, meaning, you know what, I'm awfully sorry about that. And that's the big word, 5 letters. But so, I'm sorry about that. I had not been aware of that. That was the case. And so therefore, what I usually do with it is maybe bring it to a position where it's public, where I make that public. And that's not taking anything away from me as a bishop or a human being. But hopefully it's heartfelt, and correct that matter, and then allow them to move forward. I've been disappointed, and I think disappointment is also something you could throw in there as well, where you're looking to people that maybe you may have laid hands on or strengthened or lifted up, and then you find that it's thrown back into your face. That's painful, and I'm sure ministers and ordinary people, members and people will tell you, they have experienced it. And I think the worst thing is to experience it from the people that you didn't expect to experience it from. But Again, that's life. It's about how you deal with it. But they're going to still expect a preacher like myself to be up there rightly dividing the word, as if we don't have any feelings, or if we don't have any type of feelings towards what had happened, and so it's just business as normal. And being honest is important, because there are going to be times you just, I don't think I can preach because of the way my soul has been damaged. So yes, as a minister, I felt church hurt. I felt I don't deserve this. Because it's a power thing. People want to be in, I would say, like an amphitheater. They want to make sure before I forgive you, I want to see that public apology. And I don't want to just be in the room between me and you. I want the whole lot of other people who maybe heard my name out the streets and so forth. I want them also to witness this. That's my take. People want an audience. But they feel the longer it carries on, they feel that they're in the right and they're waiting for you to make the first move. And so that's why I believe people hold on and take a long time before they actually release themselves, knowing that at the end of the day, they're only making themselves more sick. They only know to themselves that by them holding on to something that is a past, it's not really moving them any further. And if we only knew the power of forgiveness, when Jesus died on the cross, he said, forgive them, Lord, but they just don't know what they have done. And I say, God, move me to the point that I can look somebody in the eye and just say, look, it happened, but I forgive you. And I'm not holding anything over you, because at the end of the day, we are serving one God and hopefully to get into the one heaven. But people like to hold on to things because it's a powerful thing. It's something that I can hold you, only knowing that you're only imprisoning yourself. When we flip it back into the world, we have great artists, musicians, film actors, who in their lives would stumble on issues, drugs, alcohol, you name it. Because they have given value to society, it's maybe their agents or their friends or their company would make it right for them to go somewhere in a rehab to get themselves better, because they know they're better than that. And you see it's worked with many stars around the world, where they've gone away for a little while, got treatment, and come back on top of the world again and use that as a testimony. It works because that's showing you that there's value in you. We believe in you, but you've hit a rocky path. Now, if the church, again, it's always down to budget and priorities. And sometimes when we look at rehab or bringing somebody back from the brink, we look at, is that the priority? Is there another person that can fill the space? Or he'll learn his lesson for the way he treated me. But if the ministry, this is what I'm saying about budgets, or referrals, could have a facility that if someone has had a misfortunate situation in their life, that the ministry would embrace, would love, nurture, care, support to help that person back to the position. What we tend to do, unfortunately, is close the door and allow them to get on with whatever. And at the same time, we've replaced them. Now that's a greater church hurt, because they remember all the time they've spent, all the time they've given to the house and to the ministry, and now they find themselves in a situation, maybe something beyond them, that the church can only take pity, but not able to reach out and to nurture that individual. Again, the church is very poor in having mechanisms like that. And if the church is very poor financially, it doesn't mean that we're not connected to outside sources that we could refer our best player to. Back into the line of football. They're earning hundreds of thousands a week. If they're injured, they're under the best therapy that money can buy, because that's a valued player. I just wish we could learn something similar in the body of Christ, that we nurture the best people that we have. And it's not always about money, it's about just being there, reaching out, doing the best we can. love does strengthen labour. We need to bring them in a room. We need to talk. We need to find out what's really going on, what type of hurt they're experiencing. No different from a doctor's surgery. You knock the door, come in, and they will explain to you exactly the hurt that they're going through. And the good doctor will make sure he has the right applications that the individual need to apply to ensure that hurt goes away. So first and foremost, the approach must be, as I always, you've got to come, you've got to talk about it. This is what's bugging me. And then once we understand, we work through the process together. And I think you've got to be in a position of being non-biased, non-judgmental, and empathizing and understanding, if that was me, how would I feel? But it needs to be dealt with immediately, because the longer you leave it, it's like a cancer, it just spread until it's uncontrollable. So my first step is come and talk to your leader, to the covering about this, and we hope and trust he is able or she's able to offer an olive branch to move this situation on quickly before it just gets out of hand. If you're in leadership, you will experience the ups and the downs, and you're going to be expected to be dealing with this because you're the bishop, you're the leader. And sometimes you just don't even know what to say. So that's why I say, God, please, I pray for anything else. Give me your wisdom, your knowledge, and your understanding. That when I'm finished, I could have just about saved something that could have actually brought the whole house down. So that's how I deal with it. I just apply those 3 things and say, God, help me on this one, because this is new. So although I may be in this thing all my life, I have not seen this one before. I didn't see it coming, but I know the individual's coming to talk about it. So though, just give me those 3 things. I can deal with it rightly. And every time we delay in getting over this thing with the help of God, we hold back ministry. We hold back potential. We hold back so many things that the world out there is waiting for. And sometimes our greatest fatality is the greatest testimony, because it's an experience. It's an experience that somebody out there needs to hear. There's a lot of things in life that people get over, but by the help of God, He's there to take our hands and pull us over this, and we can use it as a stepping stone instead of using it as a stone to block us from moving to where we should be. Yeah, we can get over church hurt. I'm saying to every one of us, even hearing this and personally, there's certain things that we can, and most things we can get over by the help of God. Because as long as we allow that obstacle to stay in our way, it will keep us away from all the potential that God has for us. And again, that experience could captivate millions of people who may be on the brink of saying, you know what, that church hurt me, and that's it. By hearing another man's testimony, it can liberate someone. So can we get over church hurt? Yes.